Okay, you guys, so this is going to be a video to cover plant structure, which is its entirely own, as you can see, Sunshine State Standard, which is to relate the structure of each of the major plant organs and tissues to physiological processes. This is pretty much a standalone, although it could relate to the environment because we study a lot about plants and how important they are in the environment. And of course, it ties in directly with photosynthesis, but it does also stand alone. So, we're going to kind of cover this. The first thing we're going to talk about is the idea that there are several parts. We're talking about the roots, the stems, the leaves, and then the flowers. Now, when it comes to stems and roots, there's a lot of subgroups there. But, we are going to be talking about each one of those. Let's start with the leaves. The leaves are layered, and pretty much every cell in the leaf contains some chloroplasts, which inside of them has chlorophyll, which inside of them is the area where photosynthesis occurs. Okay, pretty much anywhere you see green on a plant, that's where photosynthesis is happening, because that's what is going on. Is the green is the color of the chlorophyll. But there's more that happens in plant leaves than just photosynthesis. Also, remember, photosynthesis requires a lot of carbon dioxide, so it has to pull it in out of the air. In fact, most of the mass of the cell or of the tree of the plant comes in through these little guard cells right here. And so this thing is constantly pulling in carbon dioxide. I mean, it's literally breathing in carbon dioxide and sucking in a lot of it. Okay, and remember that one of the byproducts of photosynthesis is oxygen, so it throws the oxygen back out. It also pulls in water here, and it throws water out of here for various other processes. And then, of course, leaves can store food, which is why we consume leaves. One of the ways to look at One of the ways to look at leaf function or plant structures is to look at how we eat them, and we eat leaves. There's lots of leaves. Of course, you know about the green leafy vegetables like lettuce and kale and spinach and cabbage and that kind of thing. Did you know that onions are leaves? Yeah, they're actually the leaf of the tree. They're not the root like a lot of people think. And so leaves do a lot of stuff here, but they're also in layers. They've got the dermal tissue, the ground tissue. Underneath here, we've got just regular old tissue, I forget what it's called, flowing through the leaves. And you can even look and see these veins. If you kind of hold a leaf up to a light, you can kind of see them. Is this stuff called vascular tissue? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Notice there's also a layer on top of the dermal tissue called the cuticle. It's secreted by the dermal tissue, and it's just wax, and it does a very important thing. Okay, there's a little bit closer look at it. Pretty much every leaf is structured this way. Of course, there are some variations, but this is your basic standard straightforward leaf. The stomata is an opening in the bottom of the leaf, and that refers to the actual opening. And like I said, carbon dioxide comes in, oxygen goes out, water goes out. Sometimes water comes in, but mostly water goes out. The reason water goes out is because if there's a constant flow of water from the roots through the vascular tissue to the leaves, and the way that happens is the water brings it up, and instead of trying to send the water back down, you just throw it out and get more from the roots. And so there's a constant flow of water up the tree, and it goes out to the stoma. Now these cells around the stoma, remember the stoma is just the opening, but the cells around are the guard cells, and their job is to open and close the stomata. It is like literally like a mouth, okay? And it breathes in oxygen, breathes out carbon dioxide, and breathes out water. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Breathes in carbon dioxide, breathes out oxygen, and breathes out water. Okay, and there's the cuticle that we've already talked about. It's waxy though, and that's what's really something. Is you would think that trees want water, right? But they don't get it through the leaves. The wax on the leaves is designed to protect the plant, keep it from having water sit on it. You want the water to fall off of the leaf, because if the water sits there, it's a place for bacteria to breed, then that can actually attack the plant and kill the plant. So this waxy coating protects the leaf. It's clear, it lets water come through. So it has a lot of functions. Is to mostly protect the leaf. All right. Now then, there you have this mesophyll area. Meso means middle, right? And there's two middle areas. You've got the palisade mesophyll, which is mostly where we do photosynthesis, and the spongy mesophyll is mostly where the gas is exchanged, but they all kind of do really the same thing. It's just there's a slight difference. Nothing I don't think you really need to worry about. And then of course there are the vascular bundles. That's these structures that move through. They're kind of like veins. They're very thin tubes is basically what they come down to. And because of that and because of the way water behaves, water can literally climb up these tubes against the flow of gravity. And that's the big thing about vascular tubes. There's two kinds. There's phloem and xylem. Phloem is moves food. So I just think of basically phloem, food. Phloem moves food from the leaves to the rest of the plant. Okay, so think of which direction that goes. That basically goes down the tree. But phloem moves food from the leaves, because that's where the food is produced, right, through photosynthesis, down through the tree and into the rest of the tree, all the way down into the roots. Okay, and then the xylem is the opposite. It moves water and minerals up from the roots and then to the rest of the tree, all the way up to the leaves. Okay, and xylem moves water, phloem moves food. Now, if you think about that, that's pretty crazy. Because think about really tall trees. How does water get from the roots all the way to the top of the tree? There's no pump here. There's no heart pumping and moving the stuff around. It's just pretty straightforward that the water is moving through these vascular tissues, this xylem, doing by this process called transpiration and cohesion, in which water can literally move right up a very thin tube. You've seen it happen with a straw in a drink. The water starts to climb up the sides. To stick a straw into a drink and then watch right at where the outside liquid hits the straw, and notice the inside liquid is always just a little bit higher because the water is literally trying to climb out because of the way this water is structured. If you make that tube thin enough, like this guy right here, you think this is thin because this is kind of a microscopic view of this, but it's even thinner on the inside. All these little spaces in here, water can climb right up it. It's pretty amazing. Okay, now stems have a function. The function of stems is to move materials up and down. They contain most of that vascular tissue that xylem and phloem is found in stems. It's actually found in everything: stems, roots, leaves, even flowers. But the stems have a lot of the vascular tissue, and they do a couple of things. They support the leaf to stick it up in the air. Their job is to get the leaf out to where it can catch sunlight. They support the rest of the plant. They support the the flowers for reproduction, right? Water and food move up and down them. That's another thing that happens in there. And then finally, believe it or not, we can store food inside of the stem. Some plants store a lot, some plants store a little. And a couple of examples: celery. We eat celery, but one of the more clear examples is sugarcane. Sugarcane literally stores its energy right there in the stem, and in fact, that's what you mostly harvest is the sugarcane stem, and you then grind it up and you make sugar and other products out of it. So that's just an idea of stems. Couple of things about stems. Off of the stems is where the branches grow, and then of course at the end of the stem is where the tree grows. So the terminal bud is on the very tip of the stem, as you can see here, and it'll keep growing this way, and it'll grow further up and get taller. And of course, as if it wants to produce a branch to go out to the side, that's called an axillary lateral bud, and that causes a branch to come out the side. So terminals at the top and axillary on the side. I don't have any idea how to help you remember that. Just say it over and over again until you wake up screaming it. All right. So again, talking about the xylem and the phloem one more time. The xylem basically flows up water and minerals. It is one-way only, and in fact there's structures to kind of help hold it. This is like a one-way check valve. It goes up and up and up. But phloem actually does go both ways. It goes backwards and forwards, carrying things all around the plant. So phloem can be, it generally moves down, but it can move stuff back up depending. Like trees up north, they to avoid to help them to live through the freezing temperatures, they'll actually move their nutrition down in the form of sap down through the tree and hold it in the roots until it's springtime. Then it'll bring it back up so that the tree can start consuming it again to grow some more. Now, of course, this is where we get like maple syrup, is we tap into that thing and we collect a lot of that for ourselves. But it does go both ways. Xylem is strictly up, but phloem mostly goes down from the leaves to the rest of the tree, but it can go back up from the roots up to the tree. Okay, now xylem and phloem actually make the structure of the branch mostly. So when it gets older, the phloem is kind of on the outside. Where's it at? The phloem is kind of on the outside of the tree, and the xylem is on the inside. So the phloem, once it's old, it kind of dries up and creates a bark or protective layer on the tree. There's underneath it, there's active phloem. Okay, but the further in you go, you get the heartwood, which is old xylem, and the sapwood, which is new xylem. I really doubt anybody's ever going to ask you any question about that, but I just wanted you to know that if you're like cut a tree and you look at the inside of the tree, that's what you're seeing is basically xylem and phloem of different kinds. All right. Um, so now here are some interesting things. These are organs and tissues of seed plants, which are interesting. Corms are basically stems. They're found underground. They're solid, fleshy, scale covered. We don't eat much corms, so we don't know much about them, but they're corms. They're just things. Bulbs are another thing. Onions have bulbs, and it can help. It's part of a reproduction thing to store them underground, and then they grow back in the winter, or I mean back in the spring. But also bulbs are part of the plant's life cycle, to have those bulbs. Stolons are stems that grow above the ground, but instead of growing up, they grow along. They're kind of like runners, kind of like vines. Okay, you know what tubers are? They are short, thick, underground, believe it or not, stems. Okay, I mean, these are not roots, these are stems. Everything here that we're talking about is either a stem or a leaf, right? And so I think I told you earlier that bulbs or the onions are stems. I mean leaves, and I still think they are, so I think they got this wrong. But it's either a stem or a leaf. It is certainly not a root. Can you believe that? Neither are the tubers. They're not roots. But we eat potatoes like crazy. And then of course there's the rhizomes. The rhizomes are underground stems, and they help grow. They move along underground and then they shoot up. So a lot of grasses and stuff grow that underground stem and then they come up. It helps them to spread out. Bamboo does this like crazy, right? Now then there's roots. Of course, the function of the roots is a couple of things. One, it anchors the plant. That's important because plants, they have to be held in place. And so this does that. Now there's all kinds of roots, and I could spend probably 45 minutes just talking about roots. I'm not going to. But the roots hold the tree into place. It helps it to avoid things like getting blown over by the wind or getting eroded away by a storm or just about anything. Some roots are kind of hair-like, and they are good for like the grasses, but the bigger trees and stuff, they have to have much more complex root systems, but they work. The trees still sit there, right? I mean, go up and try to shove on a tree and see which wins. Roots can also absorb minerals and water from the ground. That's one of their main functions, is to get the water and the minerals out of the ground. Now, a lot of people think that the bulk of the tree grows by the roots pulling stuff out of the ground and turning it into the tree, but the tree is mostly from carbon dioxide pulled out of the air in the leaves, not from the roots. The roots do absorb a lot of water, and then they do get some minerals that the tree or the plant needs out of the ground, but most of the tree does not come up through the roots. The roots grabs water and minerals, and also roots store food. And there are roots that we eat. I can't think of any right off the top of my head. I think maybe well, I know peanuts are part of the roots. Are they? You know what? I'm all of a sudden lost here. I'm not exactly sure. I know we eat roots. I just can't think of it. You guys look it up and send me an email, all right? Oh, well, here we go. Never mind. Okay, there's some things like tap roots. Very long, thin roots. Pine trees have these. Other types of trees have these. They shoot way down into the ground. You find these a lot in places where the water is very low and you got to go way down to get it. Aerial roots are actually above ground roots, believe it or not, but you find them often where we have a lot of water. Fibrous roots are found in like grasses and things like that. They are good at absorbing. They're in places where there's a lot of nutrients and a lot of water, so you don't have to worry about it too much, and so they grow, they spread out a lot, and they let the plant be very successful. And then of course you got these adventitious roots, and their job is to kind of spread out, and they call it adventitious because it literally looks for places to grow. And you can actually cut these and so like dig it up, cut it in half, and grow some more. Okay, now the roots grow a couple of ways. The root cap is where the root grows. Okay, so there's these little hairs that come off the side of the root, and they can grow there as well. And what happens is, if you see the root caps, that's where the root is growing. Right, so that's just something to know. And you can see there's xylem and there's phloem and there's something in the middle called vascular cambium. We haven't talked about that. But the hairs are very small. I mean, they're fuzzy. It's crazy. You know, they're like projectiles, and that's where it's an increased surface area, so it lets plants pull in more nutrients and minerals. That's what the root hairs are for. So if you ever pull up a root, you see how if you look really close, it's like almost microscopic hairs. That's where this thing has been absorbing water, and it's been absorbing nutrients out of the ground. Okay. All right, and then of course flowers. Now flowers are really complex. We could talk all day about flowers. Flowers are pretty complex, but um, they do basically have one job, although I don't really want to say that. Their main job, how about that, is that they contain the sexual organs for the plant. But they can also produce fruit. Fruit comes from flowers. And so, anything that is a result of a pollinated flower that turns into something, that's a fruit. Now, when I say fruit, you probably think of things like oranges and apples, but how about tomatoes? How about squash? Was it a pollinated flower? Then it's a fruit. Tomatoes and squash are fruits. Isn't that crazy? Um, but the thing is that that's the job of the flower, is to get pollinated and then to nourish the seeds until the seeds are mature, and then they fall off and they can grow on their own, right? And also, years ago, millions of years ago, they were developed so that they could attract pollinators, because bees and birds, they're like dumb boys. They just see something pretty and they go, oh, hey, I got to go over there. And that's exactly what flowers are for. That's why flowers look the way they do. All these crazy, beautiful colors, excuse me, is to attract pollinators, right? Now, flowers usually have both male and female parts, okay? Um, you've got things like the filament, the petal, the sepal, the stalk. These things are not necessarily involved. Well, the filament is, I guess, because it holds up the anther. But the petals are just there to be pretty, and they do kind of protect the things that are on the inside. The stalk, of course, holds it out so that something can get to it. But your things like the stigma and the style and the ovary, these are all the female parts. They're right here in the middle, okay? And so the pollen gets there, and it works its way down through the style into the ovary to where there's an ovule developing, and that's a baby seed, right? So then that means that over here, the filament holds out the anther, which has the male parts and the pollen, and the filament and the pollen or the anther go together to make the stamen. Whenever I see anther, I think antler, and I think about male deer having horns. That's kind of how I remember this as the male parts. But also remember that the male parts are on the outside and the female parts on the inside. A little bit closer look. The petals, of course, are brightly colored. They do protect the stamen and the pistils. They attract pollinating insects. The sepals, out of the covering of the flower bud, they do more protection. But the stamen is the male part, okay? The filament holds it up. The anther has the pollen. That's the entire stamen. It produces the pollen, which is like the male sex cell. Basically, I don't, you can get gross at this if you want, but this is what makes the sperm, and pollen is the sperm. And if you're allergic to pollen, well, whatever. Okay. The filament then holds the anther up, because remember, the whole goal here is that a bee climbs down in there. Down here, it's looking for the nectar that's secreted down here by the sepal. But then while it's down there, it rubs itself all over these anthers, and the anthers then get the pollen all over the bee or the bird. The hummingbirds do this too. And then they fly off and they go to the next one. And in that case, we hope that the stigma, this whole thing is called the pistil, and you would think pistil sounds masculine, but it's actually feminine. The stigma is where we want that pollen to get to. It's like the very opening, and then we want that pollen to travel down the style, okay, to the ovary, which is obviously female, and inside of the ovary there are the ovules, which then get pollinated, and then this entire structure will kind of, the used parts will fall off, the petals fall off, and all this other thing, and it all kind of wraps around this ovule here, and then that turns into a seed. And that is the whole point behind this whole thing, is to make seeds. And then the seeds, then it depends. This thing can enlarge into like a fruit, like an apple or an orange or a cucumber or a zucchini or a squash or a tomato. Yes, those are fruits. And inside of those fruits are the seeds that have been pollinated, and all the rest of the flesh around the fruit is there to kind of keep it alive long enough for it to start growing on its own. Or it can make nuts like walnuts or acorns or things like that, or it can make even smaller seeds that like the seeds on a pine tree. But the whole point of this is to make the seeds, and this is the reproductive process. All right, I'm actually going to stop because there's just not much more to that. We talked about all the parts. I'm just going to go back up here to the very, very top just to remind you that we talked about all the parts. We spent some time talking about the leaves, what their structure is and what they do. We talked about the stems, what its structure is and what it does. Don't forget that all of this has xylem and phloem. We talked about the roots and how the roots hold the tree into place and absorb water and nutrients from the ground. And then, of course, we talked about the flowers, which then creates seeds and fruits. Okay? And that ends plant structure. So 20 minutes, not bad, huh? All right, if you are finished with this, you feel good, go take the check yourself quiz. And if you need to review, play it again, or go do some more research inside of the material from the class. But this is important stuff, and they're going to ask you questions about this on the EOC. All right, don't know why you're sitting here. Get to work.